It's the Real News Network. I'm Sharmini Pires coming to you from Baltimore. It was Poland's Independence Day on November 11th. The day was seized by tens of thousands of alt-right nationalists who marched with racist and Islamophobic placards. In the city of Katowice, far-right protesters built symbolic gallows and called for the execution of 6 European Parliament members from Poland for voting in favor of EU's condemnation of these recent developments in Poland. On to discuss these developments with me is Konrad Pędziwiatr. He is an assistant professor in the Department of European Studies at Krakow University in Economics, that is in Poland. His most recent book is The New Muslim Elites in European Cities, Religion and Active Social Citizenship Amongst Young Organized Muslims in Brussels and London. Good to have you with us, Konrad.
Thank you very much for having me.
Konrad, were you surprised by the size of this demonstration for Independence Day in Poland?
Not really. It's not the first time the far right has been marching on the streets of Poland during the Independence Day. They did it in the past. What is different from the past is maybe slightly higher numbers and more xenophobic, racist, Islamophobic banners that were visible during these marches. But the context, the march of this kind of groups on the Polish streets during this particular day, and the taking ownership of this day by the far right is not something new. It did happen in the past. The only difference as well is also the fact that this year the Minister of Interior Affairs said that he did not see any racist banners, any Islamophobic banners. In the past, a few months ago, he said that racism does not exist in Poland. Earlier, he said that he stopped the flood of Muslim immigrants to Poland. So I was not that much surprised by his reaction and the fact that he was, in a way, supporting, or if not supporting, he was not condemning the outright these far-right groups that were marching on the Polish streets.
Konrad, how is the average Polish citizen responding to having their Independence Day seized by this kind of right-wing nationalist far-right activist?
Well, it's the Independence Day is not so much celebrated by the Poles. What is different is that we are approaching 100th anniversary of the Polish independence regained after the First World War. So obviously there is a tendency to make this particular day an increasingly important one, and obviously you have people who are putting flags out of the windows, but it's not a very sort of common thing to do in Poland. So I'm not that much surprised that not an average Pole is taking part in this kind of celebration. What I'm surprised by is obviously that the state is allowing the far-right groups to take ownership of this kind of marches and not trying to in any way to restrain them, especially in their manifestation of hatred towards different kind of others. That's something that surprises me, because obviously next year we'll have this 100th anniversary, and I cannot imagine if this thing is being repeated again, because I think enough is enough, and an increasing number of Poles are also outraged by the fact that the far-right groups are taking ownership and making this great sort of racist promotion of Poland around the world.
Now, the fact that this particular march was joined by protesters from nearby countries, making it one of the largest we've seen in Europe, how can the ultra-nationalist movement in a country like Poland actually be pan-European at this time?
It's not that much unusual that these groups join together and in their hatred of various types of others, and Muslims are the most important others that they try to sort of stigmatize, and they are running around the hatred of Muslims and Islam. So this is something that connects these groups. Although not all of them are anti-Muslim and Islamophobic, the vast majority are. One of the exceptions is Jobbik, which is the Hungarian far right, which is actually not very much against change a little bit with the migration crisis, but the vast majority are, and this is one of the issues that very much links these people together and makes them to come together and march together. And obviously, if in other countries these various leaders of the far right are in many ways restrained by the authorities, they see the opportunity, as they have a political opportunity, to march together with other far-right groups on the streets of Warsaw, and being protected by the police and being protected in a way by the state. Obviously, they are more than happy to do so, and that's why they happily come and march together.
Now, Konrad, on November 18, professor of modern Arab politics and intellectual history at Columbia University, had this to say about the developments in Poland.
What's most interesting to me is the transformation of the European right from an anti-Semitic right until about 20 years ago to increasingly a pro-Israel and sometimes pro-Jewish right, mostly based on Islamophobia.
Shared Islamophobia, yeah.
There are three things that the European right had always been against: women's rights and feminism, sexual rights and the gay movement, and Jews. Suddenly, all the European right has become feminist, has become pro-gay rights and pro-Jewish. And in fact, these three issues are used to justify Islamophobia and hatred of Islam as allegedly anti-Jewish, anti-women, and anti-gay. Therefore, the European right has adopted these views as a way of justifying Islamophobia, pretending that it has always wanted to protect these groups and that it attacks Islam for attacking them.
Now, Konrad, remembering that Poland was actually occupied by Nazi Germany, do you agree with what Professor Massad is saying there?
There's some truth in why he's saying that there's a lot of coming together of various far-right groups and I would say even right-wing groups who, in a way, trying to justify their fear of the Muslim other with the arguments of defense of Christian civilization. And it's very sometimes unusual to see the leaders of the right-wing parties or far-right parties who are not religious at all and use religious arguments in a way, in a culturalist sense, saying that we want to protect the Christian culture, we want to protect the Christian civilization. So this is true, and I can say that the populist far right, the populist right wing from the region of Central and Eastern Europe largely also go in this type of direction in the recent years. Although I think I wouldn't agree with the professor when he says that they are becoming pro-gay, pro-feminist, and pro-Jewish. In the case of Poland, Hungary, Czech Republic, and Slovakia, you have groups which are becoming increasingly Islamophobic and putting the sort of the defense of the Christian civilization high on their banners. But at the same time, the same groups on a different occasions march against the feminists and against the LGBTQ community. And in the case of the region, Jobbik, for example, I would definitely not say this is a pro-Jewish group at all. So some of it you can see that it does happen that these groups have chosen in recent years the Muslim other as the most important one, but and they have somehow sort of played down the anti-gay, anti-feminist, and anti-Jewish sort of card. But they have not dropped this card completely. They still have it, and they still use it. So during these marches that we have also several individuals that use openly anti-Semitic also discourse and words. There was a case of a Polish priest who was kicked out from the order, called Jacek Międlar, who made his name on not only Islamophobia and basically calling for hatred towards Muslims, but also towards Jews. So you can see that the elements of anti-Semitism are there, and in a way, Islamophobia is growing on all the types of fears which were not properly dealt with, I would say, in Central and Eastern Europe. So because we were we're victims, as you said, we were occupied by Nazis and millions of Poles and other Central Europeans died in this war. We were victims of it, but so we, in a sense, did not really fully grasp the problem of anti-Semitism and other types of xenophobias. In the case of Poland, Poland became a very homogeneous country after the Second World War, which was never the case. It was always a super diverse country earlier. So this type of homogeneity is also creating a situation that the people are not really accustomed to deal with diversity, and they do not know the other. So, for example, they do not know Muslims. They cannot really relate to any Muslims. There's a lot of research that shows that every 9th or every 8th Pole, so the very small minority of Poles have ever had or any contact with Muslims. So they do not really know. Their image of Muslims, Islam, is mostly created by sensational media, and also they are being, especially with the migration crisis, scared by these Muslim refugees or Muslim terrorists that would come and invade Poland. And a lot of media, certain segments of the media, have been very much using this kind of images. So the result of it, for example, in the case of Poland, is that Poles considered they have pretty good understanding of economic processes and other types of demographic processes, with some exceptions. And one of the exceptions is that they hugely exaggerate the size of the Muslim community in the country. They believe that 7% of Muslims, of Poles, are Muslims at the moment, which is a bit strange, ridiculous, I would say, 2.5 million. And they say that by 2020 we will have 13% of Muslims in the country, which is completely surrealistic. And obviously there are some reasons where the people think in such a way, and one of the major reasons is that they truly fear Muslims and Islam, and they were scared, especially by the media images of Muslims and Islam that they have, not by contact with any Muslims that they would know, because they do not have this kind of contact.
Konrad, is this a reaction on the part of the far right for Poland accepting refugees, Syrian refugees in particular?
Poland is not a country of immigration. Poland in the past, it did accept Muslim refugees, above all coming from Chechnya. Over the years, over the last 2 decades, almost 90,000 people from Chechnya made it to Poland and through Poland to other Western European countries, especially. There are still some Chechens in Poland who received international protection. But when it comes to migration crisis, and in particular the Syrians, who made the largest number of people coming to Europe in 2015, they did not, this path of migration to Europe was not crossing through the Polish territory at all. But it was happening in a very unfortunate moment in the Polish history, namely it was happening precisely at the time of the parliamentary election. So what happened was basically a huge politicization of the issue of immigration, supposed arrival of Muslim refugees to Poland. That's how it was portrayed. And this was very much used and abused during the parliamentary campaign in a way that was completely unexpected and never seen before, because Poland, as you know, probably has over the last 2 decades contributed hugely to emigration processes in Europe, and Poland has sent over around the migration figures show around 2 million of Poles left the country over the last 2 decades, going to the UK, Germany, and other countries of the Western Europe. So basically we've not experienced any kind of immigration processes until last years. And it was when the processes did happen, and they did happen in 2015 and 2016, you see partially as a result of the war in Ukraine, an increasing number of Ukrainians coming to Poland, mainly to work, because very few, only a few dozens, got the refugee status. Otherwise, the 100,000s that came in recent years, they came to work, they came to study mostly. So they are in no way to be treated as refugees. So Poland did have some experience of receiving refugees in the past, but it acted as a transitional, as a country of transition for the Chechens mostly. And it did contribute hugely to the processes of migration in Europe by sending its own citizens abroad. But the issue of immigration was never a political issue. The processes of emigration, the fact that the Poles left, what kind of issues it creates for demography, for economy, this was partially politicized, discussed in the public sphere, but never the processes of immigration. What happened in 2015 was that because of the overlapping of the climax of the migration crisis with the Polish parliamentary elections that were happening in autumn 2015, this was very much used, especially by right-wing parties and far right, as a very useful political tool to get more votes. And some of the parties, at least one party, I would say that some of the votes of the Law and Justice Party were gained with the usage of this anti-immigrant sort of discourse, and in particular, it was used by the far right that joined the group. There was a coalition around the rock star called Cookies, and the Cookies 15. They managed actually to get into parliament, and this happened for the first time when the far right, the farthest right, managed to secure places in the Polish parliament. So so in a sense, the migration crisis, hugely politicized, contributed to the presence of the far right in the Polish parliament. And when they got there, they, similarly to, for example, Viktor Orban, they tried to lobby for the referendum on the reception of the refugees. But very quickly after the new government was formed, in the initial months, the new Prime Minister Tacit was saying that she would honor the European agreements of accepting refugees, but starting from November, especially December, the tone and the terrorist attack in Paris, the tone started to change, and by the end of the 2015, the government said they would not accept a single refugee. And if politicians rarely obey, or if politicians rarely actually do what they say, in this particular case, they, as we know, by September 2017, when this program was closed, Poland had not accepted a single Syrian refugee under the relocation and resettlement program. So, and the issue, and it was very much used by the right-wing government to mobilize support for itself, and it was used very much as a political tool to gain support in the society.
Konrad, I thank you so much for joining us and shedding light on what's going on in Poland in terms of the far right. And we hope to come back to you and keep an eye on these developments, not only in Poland, but across Europe. I thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me.
And thank you for joining us here on the Real News Network.